Welcome to the Checkered Floor Garage. This is the Kawasaki Vulcan 750 Maintenance and Service Series. And today I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix an oil leak that I have from the Stator case right here on the left side of the Vulcan. You can diagnose the oil leak being a root cause from the Stator case gasket because first off, there's going to be driplets of oil on the left side of the motorcycle, kind of in the center of the engine, right there where I have my leak. I'll show you in the next clip what it looks like underneath my motorcycle when your Stator gasket leaks, but also keep in mind that you have this shift shaft seal that's right in there that can also be leaking oil. And mine was last year, so I do have a YouTube video on my channel showing how to fix an oil leak from this shift shaft seal, if that's what is the cause on your Vulcan. Here we are under the Vulcan, and you can see right there is the oil leak. And then looking up, you can see a driplet of oil right there. And then, like, following the trail of oil, following it back to its starting point, I was able to diagnose that the leak is coming right from there. It's where it's most wet. And this is exactly kind of like one of the bottommost points of the Stator gasket. First, I'm going to be draining the oil from this side drain bolt here using a 17 mil wrench. You can combine this with an oil change to make your job a little bit easier, or since I've got at least 3,500 miles still good for this oil, I'm going to be draining out the oil and then putting in the same oil when I'm done with this job. You may have noticed from the time lapse that I took off the oil fill cap here. I just did that to get some fresh air into the system to kind of make a vent and make the oil flow out faster. So just don't forget to put this back on. Since I was here already, it's a good idea to just check this screen, make sure that there's no debris. And also, it's a good idea to wear gloves. Anytime you're working with used automotive oil, it's a good idea to wear gloves. It's hazardous. So I'm going to put this stuff back, and then I'll continue on with the Stator job. I'll set the oil aside for later. The correct order when you put this back in is spring, screen, washer, cap, and make sure the O-ring is there and it looks good. To set myself up for success, I'm just going to make as much room as possible, and I'm going to take off this shift lever here, and this is a 10 mil bolt. Before I do, I'm just going to mark this in red here. I know you're supposed to align this little dot here with this gap, but there's also this line here, so that just confuses me. I'm going to mark that in red and kind of mark that in red, just to make it really stupidly obvious that this is the way that my shifter lever, right in that position. And I'm also going to make space by taking off this left side footrest, these two bolts right here. Now I'm going to remove these 8 mil bolts, and there are 10 of them. So starting with this one right next to the oil fill cap, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 is right here with this bracket for your clutch. 5, 6, and 7 are all underneath the engine. And then there's 8 over here, 9, and 10. I'll start with the time lapse by doing the easy ones with this ratchet wrench. And then for the ones that are out of sight underneath the bike, I'm hoping that this 8 mil wrench will be able to get to it. Now I am doing this fix with the engine still in the bike. I'm not taking out the engine, I'm not even tilting the engine. So by doing it this way, it is going to be a little bit more tedious in certain areas. So for example, I couldn't get fully out some of the bolts. But before I talk about that, remember how I started counting here and there's 10 bolts going all the way around? I marked this starting point here with number 1, so that way I don't lose track. So this is bolt 1, bolt 2, 3, and so on. Bolts 2 and 8 are different lengths than the rest of the bolts that I was able to get out. So looking here at this cardboard piece, bolts 2 and 8, let me flip this around, they're longer. So again, bolt 2 here, bolt 8 here. It's got this like longer piece here. The rest of the bolts that I was able to get off are all the same size. And then the bolts that I couldn't get off, 5, 6, and 7, they are under here underneath the bike. Here's what that looks like. I couldn't get these bolts any further out because it hits up against the frame. But I think that's okay because this should give me enough clearance to get in there and replace the gasket and apply some RTV gasket maker. Now, the next challenge in order to get this casing off is going to be dealing with this tab here on your oil line. There's a couple of ways that you can go about doing it. The two that come to mind for me are carefully bending the tab out of the way to get some clearance to get this casing off, or you can come down here at what I believe is the oil pressure sensor, and you can remove this and you can remove the oil line from here to kind of move the whole oil line out of the way. Those are the two solutions that come to mind for me. Like I said, I'm going to be bending this out of the way carefully. But before I do, I removed two other nuts to help give some to provide some give and flexibility for this oil line. First, I removed this 10 mil nut over here on the right side of my cam chain tensioner. I've got the manual cam chain tensioner, the MCCT. If your Vulcan looks like this, that means you have the factory automatic cam chain tensioner, and it'll be exactly the same thing over here on the right side. Right over here, you remove that 10 mil bolt. And then over here at the right side of the Vulcan, underneath the carburetor, there is this 8 mil bolt holding in the oil line to the rear cylinder. So just remove that. And like I said, it'll give you some little bit of extra wiggle room with the oil line if you go down the same method as I am and bending the tab a little bit out of the way. I applied a little bit of painter's tape to the top of the casing here, a little bit of tape to my flathead screwdriver. That way, as I get under here and just gently pry this up, I avoid any kind of damage to the paint on the engine casing. And then what I'm going to do in a time lapse is use some pliers, and I'm going to grab the very bottom of the tab, and I'm going to gently pull it up like this, just to clear enough space to get this gasket, to get this casing off. Here's what that looks like for me. I made sure to get a nice meaty grip kind of at the middle point of this tab and then gently pried it up, all the while making sure that nothing over here twisted with the oil line. Next, what you're going to want to do is get some sort of plastic pry bar, some kind of plastic tool, and right under here, there's a little tab, and you can put your little tool there, your little pry bar or whatever, get a small hammer or a mallet, and then this will just get you the initial gap, the initial opening of the stator case that you need. Then from there, you can remove the oil fill cap, kind of use that as a grabbing point. Over here, you can use that as a grabbing point, the same point where you put that plastic tool, and you can just kind of pull apart all around, get whatever kind of grab you can get on this casing, and you can pull this out to the maximum to get you the most amount of space. Now, it's not going to come fully off because, like I said, it's going to hit the frame, but you want to pull this off to give you the most amount of space to get in there, take off the old gasket, and to do the fix. Following this method, I was able to get maybe half an inch or more all around of space in order for me to use very carefully a metal scraper, one of these blades, to scrape away the old gasket. You want to be careful to not gouge or scratch the mating surface in between this casing and the bottom of the engine. And I'm also going to be using some alcohol spray and some paper towels to be cleaning up any oil and any gasket that remains. So do that all around the gasket mating surface. Basically, my strategy has been to scrape away the gasket with either this blade, the knife, or this little blade, depending on how much clearance, how much room I have. And then as I get a good piece of gasket sliced away, I use my pliers and I pull it out, and I just keep doing that as much as possible all the way around the gasket. Here I am at so far, making good progress. It's not going to be the perfect textbook fix. In order to do that, you're going to want to, tilt or remove the engine to get the whole casing off. This is just like honestly a DIY garage fix, but it's working well. What I find also works well is one of my wife's old kitchen knives, which is my new gasket removing knife, and pliers. So I kind of slice it up and I pull the pieces of the gasket out, and I'm going to just continue on with that. Another note, I'm not going to worry too much about the gasket up here. It's hard to get this knife, or any knife for that matter, around this oil line and down in here where it gets close to the frame. Plus, anything that I do cut, maybe I do grab it out, or maybe it can fall down, which I'm just making one problem out of another problem. So, like I said, not going to worry about up here. Instead, I'm just going to use this gasket maker all around the mating surfaces once I get the mating surfaces nice and cleaned up as best as I can. Right here at the very bottom of the case, take special consideration to cut away as much of the gasket as you can, especially around this bolt and this bolt here, even this bolt here. Because, like I said, this is the lowest part of the engine, so this is where the oil is going to fall down due to gravity, and this is where my oil leak was, and it's most likely where your oil leak is as well. Here's how much gasket I was able to remove from the Stator case. Not as much as what I hoped, because here you can see is a brand new gasket. But like I said, the most important piece, I think, is right down here. Whatever I couldn't remove, I'll clean up a little bit more with some alcohol spray now. I'll kind of switch away from cutting and move on to cleaning. And I'm thinking that this gasket maker will cover up anything else that I wasn't able to remove. I'm also going to clean up real well all under here, the side, the bottom back here. That way, when I take it for a test drive before I publish this video, I can make sure that the fix is 100% good and there's no oil leaking. And I'm going to do so still with the alcohol spray, because I find that it cuts down on that oil, the grease, the road grime really well. And I'm also going to use some brushes to scrub it real good. I also find that Q-tips are helpful at cleaning not only in between the stator case and the engine, but also in tough to reach spots underneath the engine. All right, so I'm going to do another pass at trying to get some more gasket off and some more cleaning. I'm not going to show that on time lapse though. I think you get the idea at this point, and I'm kind of running out of different ideas, different like viewpoints for the time lapse. Plus, I want to listen to some music on my phone. This is kind of brutal, but I still think, in my opinion, it's better than removing or tilting the engine. So I'll come back when this job is more done. I'm back, and I did some good extra cleaning. So now I'm ready to get on the gasket and also some gasket maker. So as I was filming this video and doing this fix, I wasn't sure if I was going to do both of these combined, the gasket maker and the gasket, or just the gasket maker, but I've got a really good strategy combining the two. So what I'm doing is using this stator cover gasket that I got from partsgiant.com, and there's the part number over there. Cost me about 20 bucks. And I've got this black 90-minute gasket maker, 25228 by Permatex. And I also traced out the gasket here to help keep my train of thought and also walk you through exactly what I did. Don't worry about the notes, I'll kind of walk you through it in a bit. But just note the orientation of the gasket. So bolt 1 is up here. Again, what I'm calling bolt 1 is right here marked in red to the left of the oil fill cap, right underneath this oil line tab. So that's number 1. And then going around, again, just as a reminder, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up until 10 right here. Now I'm going to walk you through what I did. I'm sure there's a couple other different ways of doing it. To start, I slipped the gasket under the oil tab right here at the red mark. And you're going to need to lift up this oil tab a little bit just to kind of slip in, squeeze in the gasket. And then I inserted bolt 1 to kind of hold the gasket in place, and I just hand tightened it a little bit. The first cut that I made for the gasket was between bolts 1 and 2, right about here. That allows us to be able to slip this gasket underneath the stator wires sticking out right over here. Here is bolt 1, here is bolt 2, and I made the cut right here, and then I was able to slip the blue gasket, the stator gasket, underneath these stator wires to loop it in right inside here, inside this, I don't know what this piece is called, I'm just going to call it a cylinder. So that way, again, the gasket is just being held on as we're going around to all the different bolts. Next, I made a cut right here at bolt number 7, and then I'm going to walk you through the process of how I got the how I got the gasket in at bolts 10, 9, 8, and 7. Working counterclockwise from bolt 1 here, over at 10, I slipped the gasket in here and then inserted the bolts to hold the gasket on and hand tightened it just a little bit. And I did the same thing here for bolt 9. Here we are at bolt 8. Ignore the green mark, it's just kind of a notation for me so I know where these, again, I forget the name, but where these like cylinder grommet thingies are. So I inserted the gasket inside here at bolt 8, and then I did the same thing here for bolt 7. The reason I had to cut it at 7 is because with these bolts down here, 7, 6, and 5, since you can't get them out, you're not going to be able to get the gasket around the bolt. So I cut it there, and then that kind of ends our journey here on the left side, or rather the front side of this gasket. Now let's go over to the right side, the rear side, and continue with bolts 2 and 3 to get the gasket on. Here's number 3. I inserted the gasket around here and then inserted the bolt, again, just to hold on the gasket. But there's not enough space, or not enough threads, rather, to kind of tighten bolt 3. So I'm not going to tighten it. I'm just going to leave it loose to just loosely hold in the gasket. Basically, you only want to tighten down the bolt slightly by hand if you have enough threads. Otherwise, don't worry about it. I don't want you to strip anything. Here is hole number 4, bolt number 4. Insert the gasket around here, and then again, insert the number 4 bolt and hand tighten slightly. So now that you've got all of this gasket on, you're going to make another cut here at number 5. And then insert the gasket as best you can right around here, right around the bolt that you can't get out. And then that covers about as much of the gasket that I can get on. This blue area here between bolts 5, 6, and 7, I'm not going to bother with any gasket. Instead, I'm going to rely on a good bead of this gasket maker, and I do really believe that this will hold up for a long time. What I'll be doing is using a bead of this gasket maker all around the entire surface as much as possible. There are some spaces where I'm sure I won't be able to get the tube or get any gasket maker, and that's where I'm going to rely on the blue gasket that I just put on. But again, the bottom of the engine, I'm going to make sure to put a good bead of gasket. And here's the instructions. I'm going to put a good bead, roughly 2 to 6 millimeters of this silicone to one surface. The surface I'm going to be doing is the surface opposite of the gasket. It's this surface here, the surface of the engine case, not the stator case, but the engine case, where I'll be applying my bead of silicone. I'm going to get as much silicone on, especially surrounding the bolt holes as much as possible, especially at the bottom, kind of by bolts 5, 6, and 7. And then I'm going to remove the yellow pry bar that's holding this case open. I'm going to lightly push back in the stator case, get the rest of the bolts on, and then just finger tighten until the silicone begins to squeeze out around the flanges. Let dry for 1 hour, and then you come back, tighten all the bolts, all 10 bolts to the torque spec, and then you just wait 90 minutes before you put back in the oil. I didn't show me applying the gasket on video or time-lapse because I really wanted to focus on getting this job done and done in a quick amount of time. I didn't want to delay. So instead, I'll just kind of talk about it. I was able to apply a good bead of Permatax all around here in the orange, especially, like I said, at the bottom. The only place I couldn't get in is here at the side. With the way that I'm doing this fix, I just couldn't get the tube or really any tool in here to apply the gasket maker. I also used a flathead screwdriver to apply a little bit of the gasket maker here and kind of put it in between the engine case and the stator case to kind of get some gasket maker in the tough to reach spots. It's not the most pretty under here, but I don't care about that. I just want the gasket maker to do its job and prevent that oil leak. I did go ahead and put back on the nut here on my cam chain tensioner, holding in and securing this oil line. And I did the same thing for the nut on the other side of the bike for the rear cylinder, holding in this oil line to the rear cylinder. I'm not going to touch this yet, this oil tab. I'm not going to bend it back yet. I'm going to wait an hour. All of these 10 bolts are hand tightened. I'm going to wait an hour, then I'm going to come back and tighten this down to torque spec, and then I'll bend back this oil tab at that time to secure this underneath the bolt. One more note to help you out. Bolts 5, 6, and 7 at the bottom, the ones that I couldn't get out because they were hitting the frame, I did use very carefully a pair of pliers to help me retighten, to tighten back in the bolts by hand. Very carefully, I grabbed the threads, and then very carefully, I grabbed the head of the nut, and I was able to screw it in. And then once I got the screw, the bolt a little bit further in, then I was able to, with my hand, kind of grab it and hand tighten the bolts. The 1 hour is up. I'm going to tighten the 10 bolts around the stator case. I'm also going to put back on the shifter lever with the 10 mil wrench, and then the left footrest with the 14 mil wrench. And I'm also going to carefully bend back the oil line to get it underneath that bolt there. Make sure to put the left footrest on first with the two 14 mil bolts, then your shifter lever. Otherwise, the shifter lever gets in the way of the bottom bolt here for your footrest. And then also don't forget about this bracket here sharing the hole, sharing the bolts here on the stator case. This bracket is for your clutch cable. That's how I fixed my oil leak from my stator gasket. I'm going to wait a little bit longer before I put the oil in. What I'm going to do is set the gallon of oil here. I hid the key far away. That way I don't accidentally start the bike without the oil. And then the other thing I recommend is to go ahead and check all the bolts that you loosened and everything that you took off. The oil line bolts, stator, just everything that you touched. After doing a big job like this, I think it's a good idea to check the tightness of the bolts. If you have questions and comments, please put them down below. And also, if you've either done this job or have experience in doing this type of work, let me know if I've missed anything and any other good best practices. And as always, thank you for watching.